Welcome to the Sites on EdTech podcast, a podcast by Zanichelli Venture. Today with me, Tanner Higgin and Jessica Triant from WestEd EdTech. Tanner is a senior EdTech researcher at WestEd EdTech, and Jessica is senior research associate. Can I please ask you to kind of give an overview of your own personal path and how it led into EdTech?
Sure. So I've had a winding path. I might start this path in graduate school where I got a PhD but focused on media and cultural studies. But the whole time while I was doing that PhD, I was teaching at community colleges and universities in the LA area. And trying to mix a lot of technology into those classrooms. It was a lot of focus on writing, but also a little bit of media literacy. So technology came up quite a bit and was exploring becoming a faculty member at a university, but that job market in the US is nuts. It's it is really tough. And so I started exploring other career paths and just saw some companies in the LA area that were in the ed tech space and was thinking, I've been in the classroom, I've been using technology, I'm interested in technology. Maybe I should jump over into this world and see what happens. So moved into a game developer, educational game developer and curriculum developer in LA that was doing a lot of very forward-thinking, boundary-pushing work, creating essentially an entirely play and game-based curriculum for sixth grade at a school in Santa Monica, California. So I helped build that curriculum, helped advise on their digital games, and just from there on have been in the ed tech space, mainly in like kind of nonprofit
Mhm.
world and bridging both research and creating content and programs and games and sort of oscillating between the two the whole way. And now I'm at WestEd where I'm focused intently on research.
Fascinating. And how about you, Jessica?
Yeah, so I actually started with a focus on K-6 elementary education in the US and thought I was going to be an elementary school teacher and ended up having a lot of questions about some of the things that I was seeing in the classroom and didn't feel like I had the tool set to answer any of them. So I shifted and went to graduate school and got my master's in education, research, measurement, and evaluation. And then right out of grad school, found WestEd, and found the job there. I started as a research assistant doing a lot of the like data collection and like working with teachers and students, and have now been at WestEd for it's going to be 7 years in a few weeks, and have shifted and done much more project management and leadership and working with Tanner on the EdTech leadership team here at WestEd and kind of overseeing the portfolio we have with a bunch of EdTech companies. So I kind of started being the one testing them out in the classroom and now sort of coordinating and a research partner with them, kind of leading a lot of the work that we do.
That's fascinating. Really fascinating that both of your profiles, as listeners will have understood, is kind of setting the scope for the interview, as in, of course, what WestEd does is bridging the market with academia or kind of the research behind EdTech. So on that note, I'd like to ask you, well, what does WestEd EdTech do?
Yeah, that's a good question. I can start and then Tanner, feel free to like jump in. So we partner with ed tech companies serving as their external evaluator or research partner. And so what that means is we will kind of take their product or program and put it into the classroom or put it into whatever setting it's intended to have its impact, and work directly with the intended audience, whether it be teachers or students, to get a lot of formative feedback, and kind of help them improve their products and make changes prior to doing some of these bigger, larger like impact effectiveness studies. And so our whole approach, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a lot in this podcast, is grounded in our logic model thinking, which essentially is a working theory based on prior research that helps articulate how a particular product or program drives learning. And so we ground all of our research studies in a logic model. And one of the things that we can do with companies as well is kind of help them either develop a logic model if they don't have one, or flesh it out and sort of test all of the different aspects of it to make sure that it's having the intended impact that it is hoping to have. I don't know, Tanner, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think that's a great overview. One thing I would say is that WestEd, the EdTech group in WestEd is one small portion of a very large research organization that's been around for like 60 years at this point. And our EdTech group sits within a larger learning and technology content area, as we call it, that does all kinds of research. We have researchers who focus specifically on randomized controlled trials, for instance. So it's a really interesting place where we tend to do the more actionable design-based research, usability and feasibility, but then we're also interfacing very closely with research doing long-term, intense research projects. And then we're sitting within this organization that touches every aspect of education. And some people who just don't even interact with technology whatsoever in their research paths. So it's an interesting place to be. And I've only been at WestEd I'm almost a year at this point. So I'm still learning.
I was going to ask exactly how did WestEd EdTech, how does it fit within the broader organization? So you kicked off, or well, you anticipated my question there. But then I wonder, what are the profiles of clients you deal with habitually? And perhaps at this point, if you sometimes kind of work with the other teams or the broader team at WestEd, then perhaps not just limited to WestEd EdTech, but where like whatever scope of WestEd you'd like to kind of tell us about.
Yeah, so I can start again. We work with a bunch of different clients. I think we have some relationships that we've been working with these EdTech developers for years now. Some of them are brand new that we just started working with. We've been like doing this EdTech stuff for quite a while now as well. And so a lot of folks get referred to us through other clients we've had. And the range of client varies, right? Like the products, the programs, the targeted age level, the goals, the impact, the content area, all of that varies wildly. And even the stage of development that they're at can vary. So, I mean, we'll probably touch on this as well eventually, but we do a lot of partnering with EdTech companies to go for government funding through the US, part of their like small business innovative research grants. And through that work, a lot of it is companies who are either testing out a brand new product or program, or they have a like currently existing program, but they're adding a brand new feature. And so we work with them to do a lot of that research. Tanner was talking about the like formative research of like the usability and the feasibility and the early stage research to give them preliminary feedback on any like newly developed products. But similarly, also we have the whole other side where like if someone has a very well fleshed out product, it's gone through all of that user testing, it's like they know that it works, they know that it's feasible, they're not going to run into any implementation issues. That's when we then help run these bigger efficacy studies or like a randomized controlled trial to really measure the impact and effectiveness of the product and make sure it's having like its intended outcome. So it's sort of like a whole range of clients that are all at different stages trying to accomplish different things. And like Tanner was saying, even within our tech team, we can do all of that, but within the learning and technology content area at WestEd and WestEd at large, we have a lot of expertise at all of those different stages and in all those different content areas and grade levels. So we work with a wide variety of folks.
Tanner, would you like to add anything?
I would say another interesting thing that I've been finding in the work that I do is that we'll also work with really well-established, well-known companies who are exploring new products, features, um, developing new things, and sort of need some actionable feedback early. That's been one thing I've been surprised by. That's been part of the work because I'd known WestEd mainly through that small business innovation research program and these evaluation of sort of earlier stage K-12 products. But we've been, at least I've been working with some large names that are developing new things, and they come to WestEd for that as well. And that's really exciting because you work with a company that's created some very successful things, and they're just intrigued about a new market or opportunity, and they're exploring, and we can work with them, and it tends to be pretty exciting, especially getting in the window into that kind of world. And some of those partners as well are just large foundations that are spinning up their own EdTech ventures, which is kind of I guess it's not necessarily a new thing, but it seems to be a strong trend right now in the US that some foundations have moved toward really focusing less on distributing money to a lot of different ed tech products and seeing what works and saying, let's just do it in-house. And they partner with research organizations like WestEd to help them along.
We were talking about logic models and kind of embedding this culture of evidence-based design within organizations, which I think is a very important topic at the moment in EdTech, perhaps because of as I was reading Tanner's article on EdSurge about this kind of, I don't know whether to call it an epidemic, but kind of like lack of tangible evidence in the broader in broader numbers in EdTech, right? And it's an interesting topic to discuss. Why is evidence? Why are so few companies actually providing tangible evidence of impact of their EdTech solutions? I think the Jacobs Foundation found that they ran a research. I can't recall whether it was solely European markets or whether it included North American markets, but they found like this 21% figure of EdTech companies providing some level or piece of evidence to their solutions, which is it's remarkably low, of course. So I was wondering, we can get into why this is or why you believe this is, but first of all, like, how do you set up work with partners to kind of start this from the go, this evidence-based design?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And there are a lot of questions in there, so I'll try to touch on all of it. I think to reference this statistic that you provided by the foundation, this kind of goes back to what I was saying at the beginning of why we stress the importance of the logic model in formative research so intensely, because what we see a lot is an edtech company will come with this product that they believe in so fully, and they've spent a lot of time and money developing, and they just want to be able to say it's having its intended impact. So they want to jump right to like this big efficacy impact study. And what can happen is so many different things, right? Like there can be the planned implementation that they imagined just isn't feasible, whether it's like they didn't build enough content and they thought students were going to use it for 10 weeks and kids are done in 4. Students are not staying engaged with the product, even though it was supposed to, like, there's so many different things that can go wrong, even things as little as like usability issues with like younger kids having to log on to a product and how long that can take. There's so many things that can come up that if you haven't done these smaller formative research studies to really tease out and resolve all of those issues ahead of the impact study, you can end up devoting all of this money, all of these resources, all of this time into running this big study, and you don't get the impact at all. Like you don't see anything, in part because it wasn't implemented correctly, because there's all of these other like feasibility, usability issues that were going on. And so I think that statistic could be that a lot of people are kind of like jumping over some of the earlier stage research that we think is so valuable to EdTech companies. And so then to kind of answer your other question, for any startup that approaches us or wants to work with us, I think that's sort of our mantra and our like belief is that like you have to start with these smaller formative studies if you want to like, and it all goes back to the logic model, like the things that you're the core features of your product, are they working the way they're intending to be used by like the students or the teachers or whoever the audience is. And so making sure that those pieces are all fleshed out. You've done some like research and development, like we do a study, you improve it based on what we find, go back, do more research, all of that. So at the time that you're actually ready to do your impact study to see whether there's any significant changes and you're having an impact on the outcome that you are expecting to have an impact on, none of these other issues are going to get in the way of those findings. Yeah. I don't know, Tanner, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I would just say there's kind of a difficulty in education research, given how wild classrooms are and how diverse they are. I think part of this is when you bring a technology into a classroom, variables proliferate, and it depends on the day that is being implemented, the mindset of the teacher, whether students have had enough to eat that day, how the rest of the semester went, how the prior year went. Technologies, when entered into a classroom, become part of a very strange ecosystem. And positioning it as you deploy the technology and it acts on the individuals in the room and then results in a set of effects is kind of a silly proposition in some way. And of course, you try to control for it as much as you possibly can. But we run into this case where so many developers have products that are really great, have proven themselves in smaller contexts. But when you bring them to those big studies, it can be very, very difficult to see that signal they want to see because there's so much else going on in a classroom that can throw things off. And I feel like we put a little too much faith in a single tool to be the agent of learning, when the agent of learning is the culture in a classroom. It is the teacher working with the students and doing something, and tools are part of that equation.
So what do you recommend doing to measure the impact of the tool, or at least of the stack of tools? I mean, are you saying it's basically not possible to isolate it, and we should rethink the whole way that we're trying to I guess measure educational success? Or are there some strategies to kind of isolate the tool in a significant manner?
I think Jessica was kind of getting at what we see as maybe the approach moving forward, which is trying to build a collection of evidence from all with different lenses and different contexts at different levels of rigor that start to tell a story about a product's usage and build it well over time, grounded in learning science, right? Tested with in a lot of different types of classrooms and iterated on over time so that when you get to that final study, hopefully you're better positioned to get that signal. But if you don't, it's not like this existential crisis. You can understand that this is one data point among many, and you hopefully learn something from that and can possibly adjust it. But it becomes less, I think right now, those big impact studies feel like our entire company's existence is resting on this one study, and this is the one thing we're going to do, and we're working up to it. If it's one part of a journey, perhaps it has less of that intensity around it. Now, I do think there are other ways to maybe study impact that we could get into that take into account this, the nature of classrooms and what I think best supports a tool's usage. And that to me is like making sure that tool that that when we're researching tools, we're looking at like how well they're supporting teacher and student agency, building social cohesion. I think those are the kinds of things that make sure a tool gets implemented to fidelity and implemented well. And I think if we start doing a little bit more of that work, we'll start seeing the effects be stronger. But it's so complicated. And this has been a long running issue. I mean, this is like decades of struggle.
Right. I'll ask you to unpack that since you just mentioned you think there are some more specific ways. But Jessica, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I was just gonna say, I think Tanner brings up like another really interesting point in terms of like our approach with a lot of these smaller scale studies, even though like he's saying it's not like this huge impact study that everyone wants and is like the gold standard in research, but there's a lot of really wonderful, rich feedback and information and insights you can get from these studies. Even like the feasibility studies, there's certain things like if a teacher likes a product and thinks that their students are super engaged and it's meant to be some sort of like supplementary resource that isn't like replacing an entire curriculum. It's just like an added thing that they find value in. Like that's huge. And maybe that wouldn't show in like directly in like a pre to post student math test score change, for example, but it's still something that really matters. And there's so many EdTech tools out there now, and like districts and teachers are overwhelmed with having to make decisions on what to use and why to use it. And so if it like the teacher perspective is huge, and if you can get even some like qualitative data around them really liking it and seeing value in it and them seeing something important change in their students who they know better than we do, that is also a really valuable finding. And so yeah, I think to Tanner's point, like the impact study is important, but it's just one piece of like a much larger story you can tell about the success of your product.
Right, right. So I'll go back to Tanner with like, can you further unpack that point that you kind of left as a cliffhanger? Like, I do believe there are some, you were saying, I do believe there are some specific methodologies that we can adopt aside from taking a step back and being and taking this stance of being like, okay, it's not the one study, what Jessica was just saying right now. There's the whole picture. And if something doesn't show somewhere, but engagement or just the general feel of how the class is going is improved, even though a pre-post test study doesn't show significant impact on the one specific metric. I mean, if it improves engagement, then that's a piece of the story and the puzzle and what we can notice. But you were mentioning you were hinting to some specific strategies, I think, Tanner. Did I get that right?
Yeah, well, I have ideas of strategies that I haven't. This is something I'm pursuing and have been in my little theory box, trying to devise like how this would actually get tested and proven. But so here's my belief, and this is rooted in a lot of work with EdTech in classrooms, a lot of evaluation of EdTech, and also looking at a lot of EdTech that has successful evaluations that goes wrong in classrooms. And all of this adds up to me that when we look at technologies and their implementation in classrooms, we're often so laser focused on academic outcomes. Can we implement a tool that improves this outcome and we show a large effect size enough to like validate the whole existence of the product? But what I've found is some of those products that do that really well, teachers and students absolutely hate. And there seems to be this paradox almost like, they're really, really effective, but then teachers and students can't stand them because they've been so hyper optimized to like get a change on, in learning, in whatever assessment or whatever, that they kill the love and joy of learning. And this unlocked something to me that, like, even for products that are successful in this context, they could be more successful when they actually get deployed if they're paying attention to whether teachers and students feel like that product is actually supporting the kind of learning they want to be doing, their vision for learning. They're like, and that often comes down to like, is it giving people a feeling of control and agency? Is it building social relationships in a classroom? Is it like supporting the kind of pedagogy that teachers and students would really be interested in doing? So this is a long way of saying that for those products that are not successful even in those trials, perhaps if they were looking at these other signals as well, they might be finding that they are actually affecting learning very positively, but they're just not driving that one metric. That over the long term and in a lot of different scenarios actually leads to great learning experiences, but maybe just not in the way that we've been conditioned to expect. And this is rooted in my belief. When I was previous to WestEd, I was at Common Sense Media, and we rated and reviewed like 4,000 EdTech tools. And it was on a 5-star scale. And one common thing we would tell among the team was that some of the team's favorite tools were 3 stars because it all came down to whether it was implemented well or not. Like if it wasn't, it would be a disaster, but if it was implemented really well, it could be incredible. And that to me comes down to like, we need to be rethinking like where the weight is placed in terms of EdTech research, because I think there's a lot of actually good tools that like their entire existence rests on this big impact study, and maybe it doesn't go well, but it's still a good tool in my view in some cases.
Yeah. Am I to understand, and I think here I have to make a disclaimer that while I do work with well, RCTs and impact evaluations to the extent that my position asks me to do that, that's much less than you do. So here comes the question. Am I to understand it as one thing is it's shifting what we measure perhaps away from the kind of the hard skill measurement of like, okay, we've taught a certain curriculum this year. Has this been learned to whatever extent? Versus perhaps broader skills and the difficulties therein of measuring perhaps metacognitive skills versus teamwork skills or social skills of kind.
Yeah, and in some way, and studies are already doing this. And we do this at WestEd. We'll have like a variety of signals we're looking for. But what I find is that so often it truly rests on the academic outcomes. Like that's what people actually care about, and that's what all the discourse is about. And I think if we were to expand and accept that learning is dependent on a lot of different things and happens over time, it may not just be the subject of one single intervention, but maybe part of a larger process. And a big accomplishment with learning might simply be that teachers and students are enjoying coming into the classroom a bit more and are actually like their learning is being driven and motivated more successfully. That in combination with those academic outcomes is where you start to, I think, affect actual lasting change in classrooms. Whereas we've been in this pattern where we've been trying to develop ed tech that pushes academic outcomes at any cost. And in the process, people start to really have a negative attitude towards ed tech. This is something that's happening in the US where people are saying, I'm going screen free in the classroom, or I'm limiting the amount of screens I have in the classroom because students and teachers are tired of it. I think we have to start rethinking the purpose and role of ed tech in a classroom. And that it's not just this instrumental disruptive force, but it is something that fits within a culture and makes that culture better. So it makes learning better over a longer term.
Oh, what do you like to measure and what don't you like to measure? Very
Well,
clear.
this is what I'm trying to figure out. Um, what my soapbox that I'm on right now is essentially the first year, or really the first 6 months of my time at WestEd, I did like a giant literature review of EdTech research and also uh, like learning theory and philosophy. Because I had been like, I think like a lot of people, I've been in EdTech for it's like 20 years now, essentially. And I keep seeing the same pattern repeat. And I think AI sent me over the edge where it felt like it's happening again. We're
Yeah.
doing this all over again.
Yeah.
And I've been trying to think of how do we break free of this essential paradigm where we position EdTech as the agent of learning and this pill that we distribute to students and they take the pill and a change happens, which is not in any way in line with what classrooms are like or how learning happens. um, so I've been trying to devise a solution to this and like what we measure, what are the main things we look for, what are those essential drivers of learning. And that's still in process. But I honestly think a lot of this could come through more formative research in classrooms done by administrators in partnership with teachers that when they purchase a tool or pilot it, they're actually asking students and teachers what they think about it. And
Mhm.
if it like increased their joy, their motivation, did it like build curiosity, did like these simple little things. I feel like people won't even ask teachers this.
Mhm.
They just look at their spreadsheet in the principal's office and look at like, did this deployment affect change across these key student demographics?
Mhm.
And
Jessica,
that's
what
just
do you like to measure and what don't you like to measure?
Oh man, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what Tanner is saying for sure. I think we like another thing that I think we're trying to do more and more of, and part of this is embedded in this formative research, is yeah, talking to teachers and students and getting feedback on all the aspects. And we do this also with districts and trying to understand their priorities and what are they most interested in improving and changing. And yeah, it gets back to kind of what I was saying earlier, that it's not just about the pre-post testing scores, but the qualitative data that you can get. Like how did it go with the students? Like, did they like it? Did they talk about it? Did they want to continue using it at home outside of the classroom? Like things like that that are not necessarily super easy to measure. But they provide a lot of like positive feedback. And even if like students are super engaged and it's semi-effective, but they want to do it all the time, it's probably still going to ultimately help them learn in some way and they're going to enjoy it, which is great. So yeah, I like fully agree with what Tanner's saying. I think we do have a focus on like the academic outcomes, often because that's sort of the thing that you want to see change on, is you want students to grow in some way, ideally on a metric that is used to determine how well they're learning certain content and all of that. And so those are still very important, but I do think there's like a much bigger picture. And yeah, like we're saying, it's not as if these ed tech products go into a classroom and just have a little bubble where you can like perfectly measure it and nothing else impacts it and nothing else matters besides like how well they performed on their like state math test, for example, or something. So yeah, I think the holistic picture of how well an ed tech program or product is doing is great.
So I previously recorded this interview with Fiona Aubrey-Smith. She's from the UK and works within UK EdTech. And I found it very interesting. She was kind of developing this service of build your EdTech stack for multi-academy trusts, well, schools or groups of schools. I don't know if you use the same terminology in the States, in which she basically helped schools, groups of schools, districts, you would say in the States, to kind of identify their pedagogical philosophy and then decide which tools to adopt based on that. I see you both nodding. Seems like it strikes your chords as well. Have you seen that happening? Do you, what have what have you got to say about this?
I don't see that happen. And I am absolutely in full support of that idea that like every school in the US will have a mission statement, and possibly also backed by their kind of learning values. And there's also a new trend where they're building their student profile, which will be like, we want students to be critical thinkers and we want them to, a lot of like soft skills, or I don't know how you might term them. And they say all these things, they put it on the website, but then I look at the kinds of rubrics schools use to evaluate tools they're procuring, and those kinds of things are not significant. It's like, does this have appropriate privacy and security practices? Does it have single sign-on? Does it have any efficacy research behind it? Does it, and no one's thinking like, does anyone really want to use this thing? Does it like support the kind of learning that they enjoy engaging in the classroom? And it just doesn't, at least in the kind of materials I look at, doesn't quite come up. And I think that's connected to this idea that we're getting at, which is we need to get a lot more data from students and teachers about what they think about these tools. Because I think the story would be so much different. I think a lot of the tools that we see as like some of the best, most proven tools are actually in classrooms, some of those that students and teachers just don't enjoy using because they're so optimized to get that signal from them. It's like the old BF Skinner box, but writ large. I mean, that's like the founding principle of EdTech in a lot of ways. Personalized learning is like a reinvention of that sort of philosophy of affecting change through stimulus.
Jessica?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Tanner answered that beautifully. The only thing I would add is I think also like in addition to, yes, the mission statement of a school, they should be aligned and making choices based on what they have decided is their own learning philosophy. And I feel like they kind of like what we were touching on earlier, where there's a lack of evidence on a lot of these ed tech products or research that's been done on them. That's part of another mission we have here of trying to provide documents to help schools and districts make better informed decisions about what tools they should be implementing. And so those reports that you saw, the like key findings that summarize all of these studies we've done, it's all under the like SBIR, the Small Business Research Grants, but we made those with the main goal of sharing them back with the districts that we worked with, so that not only do they get to see the findings of the study their teachers and students participated in, everything we explored, like understanding the product fully, but they see for all of the products that had studies that particular academic year. And so I think it's similarly to wanting it to be better aligned to their values, they also need better information to make better informed decisions about what tools and what products they should be using in their school. And so that's another big thing our team has been grappling with and trying to adjust to make sure that they're part of the conversation and the research and providing feedback, and also then given the findings and the results in a way that's tangible for them, and they can use it to make informed decisions in their own school or district.
You're really you're both hinting to questions that are following up several times during today's interview. So I was gonna go in the direction of, even though I guess your position isn't too connected, or your day-to-day roles aren't too connected to marketing of edtech companies. It is very relevant at the end of the day. I would say the asymmetry of information problem, right? And what kind of mechanisms can fix the asymmetry of information problem in edtech. And you were talking about this right now, Jessica. So can you develop on this, and perhaps since some of the EdTech companies you've partnered with and solutions you've worked for are public in key finding reports, public online on your website. Perhaps would you also like to mention a couple of examples of how you've worked with companies to kind of and also kind of both on the how you worked with them tangibly to analyze their solutions on educational aspects and how perhaps this can also help them to, I would say, market their products, market their solutions. We can say link to school districts and speak to teachers. Perhaps it's a different way of saying marketing, but I would say marketing.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I mean, one of the nice things about being the like external evaluator and researcher is like we're not super focused on the marketing of the product. It's we are an external evaluator because at the end of the day, we want to be conducting rigorous research and providing data and findings that's based on teacher and student authentic feedback. And so I think that's part of what is really great about partnering with someone like WestEd actually is that it means so much more if you do have like positive findings and really insightful like feedback to share if it's done by someone outside of your company because they don't have a vested interest in the success of your product. And so and all of that findings report for a lot of those studies, they're all run fairly similarly because they're all grounded again in our main approach to this, where they all started with some sort of formative research study. A lot of times, if we're going to partner with someone to go in on a grant together, WestEd can offer some services to help them really tease out that logic model to ensure that it's unbelievably clear like what they're planning on developing, what their core features are, like how it's going to be implemented. All of that is a big role that WestEd often plays because even the idea of like a logic model is sometimes not super familiar to EdTech developers. And kind of grounding it in research and like prior research that's been done so that these like mechanisms lead to these other things. That's not something that a lot of EdTech developers like have just in their back pocket, and WestEd has tons of expertise in that. So we do a lot of work with really helping them flesh out what it is their product is intending to achieve. And then once that's clear, it's really easy for WestEd to come in and just test every single one of those pieces. So like if these are your core features, are they going to work? Like, are students going to be able to access it? Are teachers going to be able to access it? If this is the way that you want it to be implemented, is it feasible if you actually put it in a classroom? Like, again, we could have students use it on these like one-on-one sessions, but when you throw it in that classroom, like Tanner was talking about, and there's all these other variables, and is it feasible for them to use? Can they actually use it the way that it's intended? And so I think WestEd works very closely with our research, our EdTech partners to ensure that our research is very well aligned to what they want to get out of it and provides concrete feedback for how they can continually develop their product, ultimately leading to what they want, which is to be able to say something positive in a way that can be marketed to schools and districts. And so I think and the SBIR grants are, and anything kind of comparable to that, any sort of formative research where there's this research and development that's like this back and forth process is so valuable and so wonderful. And I think can provide a lot of steps for evidence to be provided and for developers to continually be improving on their product. And so that's WestEd's main role and goal. And all of that is we're ultimately trying to provide research and feedback for the developer. So it should be totally aligned to what they want to learn, right? And so we work very closely to help develop research plans and questions and get all of the feedback. But also, like, we are an external partner, and so we're going to be authentic and honest with all of that feedback. And so, which is good, right? If you want to know all the things that are wrong with your product ahead of actually trying to market it in a real way, because you don't want to have that later on. And so that is sort of our way of providing recommendations to help improve development.
And I think that really shows from the previous parts of this interview and Tanner's thoughts about like, this is what I've been exploring. What did you call it, Tanner? Your like exploration box of
My
measure.
theory box is, yeah, it's sometimes referred to as a cave, but you know, it's like my the place I trap myself in and just am alone with my thoughts. Yeah.
Precisely, and I think you speaking today about your cave kind of shows how uh, um, I, I I I would say anyone can expect a very truthful kind of mirror to what they're doing if partnering up with you. You were talking about SBIR, which is very US specific. Is this widely known by EdTech developers? That they have this option or not?
That's a good question. I don't know how widely known it is. I think we yeah, I don't know, Tanner, if you have any thoughts on that. I feel like it's maybe a mix. Like a lot of people hear about it and then come to us because they get referred by the Institute of Education Sciences within the US to work with WestEd. And other folks just reach out to us and have no idea that these grants exist and provide funding for development. And these particular grants are great because you have funding to develop something out and it pays for the research. So it's like that R&D. But even though this is a US context, I think that same general like formative research approach can be applied even if you're not getting grant funding, right? So like that same concept of having iterative research and development and then more research and more development is something that any company could do and is really valuable. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's particularly very relevant though to edtech startups because of course they're low on funds compared to established edtech companies going to launch a new product or kind of new versions. And perhaps then SBIR can be a great vehicle for a startup to embed research and evidence-based design from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Tanner, or Jessica, sorry.
No, I was just fully agreeing with you. You can go off to Tanner.
Tanner, did you want to add anything to perhaps like some of the stories of partnerships or work you've done, or Jessica, perhaps some of the ones that have been showcased. How did you partner up through or not through SBIR to kind of help them? Any specific examples that you can openly share, perhaps?
I mean, Jessica, you've worked on some of these research projects, which I have not. So I don't know if you want to talk about one of those experiences, might be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of the companies that are within the key findings report that we started as a what's called like the phase 1 SBIR, which is their like initial small funding amount. And so in many of those instances, if the phase 1 is fairly successful, you can apply for phase 2 funding, which is much longer, it's much more money. And that's when you kind of have a mini pilot study to get some initial like preliminary impact data at the end of the 2-year grant window. And so a lot of those, several of those partners that are in there, we have been working with them for years now. And you go for the phase 1, you go for the phase 2, and then if they want to even continue developing and they have like a new product idea or like a new feature that they want to add, you can like go back for like additional phase 1 funding, all of this. And so we've had a lot of really strong relationships where we've been working with these companies for a very, very long time. And there's lots of opportunities as well to extend beyond that funding. So in some instances, folks will have really enjoyed all of the feedback they got from working with WestEd. And even though the SBIR funding or grant funding has dried up, they will just like pay us directly to continue being like a consultant or an evaluator or whatever it may be. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't even know what the statistic is now because I don't think we've updated it recently, but at one, like we've worked with over probably 60 different ed tech companies. And a lot of them are, have been like unbelievably positive, and it's just been a great experience for both.
I was thinking a solution that is being experimented a lot with in Europe, I guess to see the change that you both were hinting to when it comes to what to measure, how to develop with that in mind is also test beds. Is this a common solution in the States? And I mean, how can you speak to the test bed option, meaning possibilities of co-development of edtech solutions? Even, of course, startups or market-led solutions being co-developed with educational institutions on ground, and then kind of going through co-development iterations within the setup of a test bed, and yeah, eventually being property of the developers, but at least co-developing educational institutions get kind of an ad hoc solution being built for their problem. Is this a common experience in the States?
It's been a thing I've seen tried over time, and I do think it's rooted in a very good idea. And it seems to have persisted, but they come and go is one thing I've noticed. And the curious aspect of it to me is that these are also just practices any developer can do on their own with the right methodology as well. And I think a lot of, given the rise of design-based research, that some developers are already just doing this just as part of their methodology of design. So it's one of those things that I think has a good idea at its core, but I've seen it struggle to sort of maintain over time and catch on. But it's been curious to me. And I don't know that I can say much more, but it probably rests on some kind of funding challenge that you, Luigi, are probably much more aware of than myself as to why those test beds, like the test bed networks, never quite cohere, or they come and go with a foundation who gets really interested in it. And then after like 3 years, their strategy shifts. I think anytime your ideas rest on the back of a strategy of an external organization, it's going to be very challenging.
I think probably from what I've seen personally with test beds I've worked with, the very valuable offer they can serve, especially to edtech startups, is of course early access to schools to kind of experiment with, which is specific of the edtech field, of course. That other fields, it might be easier to get your beta customers on board. And if we're talking about B2C edtech, then it's much easier, right? But if we're talking about K-12 edtech, I think test beds can be enabler to kind of give a comeback. But you're right that I do feel like it does go in cycles, and there's some good questions to ask about that. Did you want to add anything to that, Jessica?
No, I feel like Tanner got it. Thank you, though.
I think as a kind of closing question, I'll finish with a huge one, which is speaking about cycles, Tanner. In your article on EdSearch, very interesting read, by the way. You spoke about these cycles, and we touched upon them today as well. These cycles of edtech disruption, and the whole point of hype in edtech and non-hype. And we're navigating the generative AI and EdTech wave now with the whole disruption thing. I'm sorry if I have to ask you about hype, but I do. There's hype, of course, where there's also a lot of uh, newly potential features within EdTech that can be enabled by generative AI, of course. So there's kind of meat to the bone within the hype, I guess. How do you place this within these endless cycles of disruption in EdTech? How do you feel about it yourselves?
I'm gonna let Tanner fully take that one on.
I think one thing we struggle with, and I'm going to say this is in the US context, but I have heard from friends over in Europe that how things get discussed and articulated in the US tends to infect some discourse over in Europe. But I've noticed there's a lot of resistance over there as well. But um, I think the ethics and philosophies of Silicon Valley have trapped ed tech over the past like 40 years. They've kind of set the agenda about what technology means and can accomplish in classrooms. And their ethics are aligned with business, like what works for selling things into classrooms. And part of that is positioning every new technology as this disruptive change that nothing's ever been like it before, nothing will ever be the same again after it's deployed. And anyone who spent any time in education, you start recognizing when these new cycles hit. And I think AI is one of the most significant because it's arriving at a time of ed tech having gone through very significant challenges through distance learning and the money drying up. Like venture capital is at like a 10-year low in ed tech in the US and maybe globally. So I think there's a lot of strength around the narrative around AI as this disruptive force that's going to change everything because it's good for business because people want to get funding tossed at them. And it's much easier to get funding tossed at you if you say that this new technology is going to fundamentally shift schools. But I've been on a project I'm on talking to tons and tons of students and teachers. And the really strange thing is, it's sort of, for them, it's like, oh yeah, this is interesting, but here are like the big challenges. And they're like different. And there are solutions for those challenges that need to be figured out. And they might be in part accomplished through technology. So that is the kind of troubling thing to me is like, are all of these AI solutions that are disrupting things, are they even focused on the essential needs of schools?
I think this brings up my last interview with Dan Fitzpatrick, who's doing a lot of work with AI in education in the UK. But actually, on recording, he told me, yeah, I don't really work with AI. It's basically just my Trojan horse to get into schools because it's the topic that allows me to get into schools and sit with them and rethink how like the pedagogical model can be structured with the help of technology as well, of course. But kind of he used of course the metaphor of the Trojan horse, and I was like, wow, okay, that's really nice to hear, right? You know, you're labeled as AI in education, but then and I think it kind of what you just said recalls this thought and perhaps an optimistic view of how can we use the hype and the discussion, perhaps if using your paradigm kind of left to us by Silicon Valley, in positive manners to drive, positive change. Yeah, this is kind of a closing thought that came up.
Yeah, that I've heard that as well from other people that they're using that strategy. And clearly every company's splash page now has AI, as it
Yeah,
had things prior, other buzzwords. That it's funny
yeah,
how this happens in these cycles. You see every company's marketing message change. It's seemingly within a few months.
yeah.
But they're still doing essentially the same thing, just with maybe a chat bot attached to it. But uh, over and over again with technology, it's always interesting. No matter the technology, the practice in the classroom, the pedagogy tends to be persistent over time because it's rooted in sound learning science principles. So
Mhm.
you can just carry through, no matter whatever technology you're using, there are still great principles for learning that are stable, that you can just say, okay, now AI has appeared, but let's continue doing this. And that's really where the change happens, I think. And the technology ideally should echo those principles. It doesn't always, but hopefully it does. And then it makes it even easier to do.
Thanks a lot for being with me today, Jessica and Tanner. I really enjoyed this conversation, and yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was great.
Yeah, likewise.